Human history is a long tapestry that stretches from one disaster to the next. Whether it be the Great War, the Masters' Supermutant Army, or the current mess the Mojave's in today, humanity has come face to face with extinction-level events time after time, yet we always somehow manage to come out the other end alive. We're not unlike roaches in that respect. Tough to kill, despite how hard some have tried. In a way, there's some comfort in knowing that even after the worst of cataclysms, we'll still be around. The resilience of man could be attributed to any number of things. Pre-war scientists devised state-of-the-art fallout shelters designed to keep humanity alive well after our expiration date. Some old factions like the Brotherhood of Steel or the Followers of the Apocalypse have made a career out of slowly rebuilding the world, securing a safer future in their own colorful way. Though perhaps the greatest testament to humanity's resilience lives in those who, when faced with certain death, denied the Reaper and went on living all the same. You might laugh at some of the stories told by old Brahmin barons or junkies when they talk about a man once set ablaze and thrown into the pits of hell. But look beyond the haze of old age and chem abuse, and you'll find there's some truth to it. Nothing better encapsulates the resilience of humankind than the story of the burned man. The story of Joshua Graham. Born in a place called New Canaan, Joshua Graham was a gifted man, adept at interpretation. He spent his earlier years there learning the many tribal dialects of the region, acting as a sort of translator between his people and theirs. This would prove to be advantageous when Joshua left New Canaan years later, journeying towards the Arizona wastelands on missionary work. While there, Joshua made contact with the Followers of the Apocalypse, but more specifically, with one man, Edward Sallow, though you may know him better as Caesar. Joshua proved to be instrumental in the early years of the Legion, acting as a translator between Edward and the many tribes they came into contact with. If it weren't for him, it's likely there never would have been a Legion. As a result of this loyalty, Caesar promoted Joshua to be his top field commander, or legate, the first the Legion had ever known. For a time, Joshua and Caesar were unchallenged in their campaign through Arizona, all until one of Caesar's frumentarii brought word of a pre-war structure to the west, the Hoover Dam. Protected by the mightiest tribe the Legion had fought yet, Caesar was obsessed. In time, they launched a full-on assault of the dam, with Joshua Graham himself leading the charge, though we all know how that story goes. Thanks to the quick thinking of the NCR Rangers there, Joshua and the rest of the Legion forces suffered a humiliating defeat, returning to Caesar in shame. Caesar did not take this failure lightly. Though he and Joshua had become close in their years of conquest, he knew that an example had to be made, an example of what happens when you fail the mighty Caesar. As punishment for his failure, Joshua Graham's body was covered in pitch, set aflame, then thrown into the deepest canyon of Arizona. Rumor has it, he didn't even scream on the way down. With his body broken and charred, Joshua's fate seemed clear. A lesser man would have died from the engulfing flames around him, let alone the fall to the bottom. But Joshua Graham was no lesser man. No, Joshua possessed a kind of will that few others in the wasteland ever have, a burning will to live, to outlast the horrors of the world even if his body nearly failed him, a resilience to carry on, no matter what. It should come as no surprise when, days later, Joshua woke up and walked all the way back to New Canaan. It took him 3 agonizing months to return to his home, where he was welcomed with open arms. In time, Joshua would begin to let go of the vanity and ego he had developed by Caesar's side, rekindling his faith and strengthening his resolve. Though fate seemed determined to test that resolve, time and time again. When New Canaan was destroyed, Joshua, his friend Daniel, and a few other survivors left for Zion, intent on starting anew among the untouched wilderness there. Though Joshua mourned the death of his home, his anger would not get the better of him until the ones responsible The Whitelegs followed these survivors into Zion. Though his friend Daniel abhorred violence, it seemed to come to Joshua naturally, as he desperately sought to destroy the Whitelegs as recompense for their deeds. In time, thanks to the help of the courier, Joshua Graham's lust for warfare returned, as he and his army of tribals laid waste to the Whiteleg forces in Zion. This was the beginning of the end for Joshua. In the years that followed, Joshua began to warp the minds of the tribals under his control, using them as his own personal militia. They began raiding nearby settlements and tribes on Joshua's command, rarely out of necessity. His days of practicing mercy and of letting go of his warmongering ways were gone, as was the man that Joshua used to be. Though soon enough, that would no longer matter. As more and more denizens of Zion were killed by either the Mossmen or the airborne spores, Joshua was among the many that had become infected. By the time Daniel returned to the canyon, Joshua's fate was sealed. The man whose life was nearly taken at Hoover Dam and nearly snuffed out by Caesar's punishment finally felt death upon him. When he eventually did die, his cult of tribals mourned him for days. Daniel, once a friend to Joshua, pleaded with them to burn his body to prevent him from coming back as one of the spore carriers that was destroying Zion. Though the tribals did not budge. Leads with chalk, now the acting war chief, took it upon himself to bury Joshua, taking him to a place they called the Eyrie, and finally laying his body to rest. If they had listened to Daniel, perhaps they could have avoided the nightmare that was about to be unleashed. Maybe there was something in Joshua that made his mutation different. Perhaps his will to live transcended even death, being wrongly translated into the abomination he became. Maybe it was his genetics, his DNA being recoded and remixed after nearly dying at Caesar's hand. Whatever the case, the thing that emerged from his grave was no longer human, no longer him. Mere hours after Joshua died, the Wendigo was born. Standing anywhere from 12 to 15 feet tall, the Wendigo is a giant spore carrier, given unholy life by the same pathogen responsible for destroying Zion. Stories about the Wendigo range wildly on account of their authors either being dead or dying. What we do know is that it's unnaturally fast, able to close the distance between you and it in less than a heartbeat. Its speed is only rivaled by its strength, with its long, mossy appendages putting even Deathclaws to shame, ripping apart just about anything or anyone. And the worst part? By all accounts, it seems to be just about unkillable. I've heard stories of full NCR battalions trying to take it down, only to be slaughtered like cattle, their bodies so badly mangled you couldn't tell one corpse from another. Though it does have one weakness. There's no sure way to kill it, but if you at least want to increase your chances of survival, you'll need to remind it of who it was before. How, you might ask? Well, his persistence isn't the only thing that outlasted Joshua's mind and body. His fear of fire did as well. You won't kill it, nothing will. But if you set the monster ablaze, it'll turn tail and run like a bat out of hell. Though that doesn't mean it's done. No matter how many times you torch the Wendigo, it will always come back, intent on ripping you limb from limb. With all that in mind, it makes sense why Daniel and the rest of the tribals chose to flee Zion. To the tribals there, the Wendigo was a sign that they were no longer welcome, a divine force of nature sent to punish them for their misdeeds. Only Daniel saw past the superstition. For months, with every story he heard to the first-hand experiences he had, Daniel began to piece together the Wendigo's true nature. During their exodus, after the tribals made their way into the long dark, Daniel stayed behind. He knew what the Wendigo was, and more importantly, he knew he had to kill it, to finally put his old friend to rest. Locking the doors of the long dark behind him, Daniel made his way to the Eyrie, intent on setting Joshua free once more, through searing flame. though, like so often before, Daniel's wishes were ignored. In the years that followed, more and more unlucky visitors would enter Zion, either seeking the paradise of years past or on diplomatic missions. A group of NCR troopers were deployed to Zion a few years back, part of the Reformed Republic's attempts to clear the cloud in NCR-affected areas, though, predictably, things haven't exactly gone to plan. Today, Zion remains a hellhole, still covered in a hazy green fog and populated by hordes of spore carriers. If by some unfortunate circumstance you find yourself there, you do well to listen to what I'm about to say. Stick to the waterways, travel only when the sun begins to rise, and always carry some kind of incendiary weapon. Don't journey into Zion thinking that if you're careful enough, you'll be able to avoid the Wendigo. It haunts that canyon like something out of a pre-war ghost story, and it will always find you, no matter what. But you're probably bored by now of all this talk of death, suffering, and toxic clouds. It's no mistake to say that things have changed quite a bit since the courier first walked the wastes. Both Zion and the Mojave are husks of their former selves. Not many people are rushing to Vegas or Zion National Park anymore. If anything, it's the complete opposite. A whole lot of folk would give just about anything to escape life in the Mojave and return somewhere that they're truly safe. Though escaping the Mojave isn't the hard part. It's letting go. But that is a story for another day.